My name is Claire Maddox. I'm 33 years old. The first time I learned my mother had another daughter, she was standing in my kitchen in Denver, rain dripping off the hem of her wool coat, asking me if I had a minute. It was a Thursday, the kind of gray afternoon that makes the whole city look like it's holding its breath. I had just come off a 12-hour shift in labor and delivery. My feet hurt, my mascara had settled into the tired lines under my eyes, and there was still a plastic hospital band in my scrub pocket because I kept forgetting to throw things away. I remember staring at the woman on my doorstep and thinking she looked familiar in the wrong way. Not like someone I knew, like someone my body knew before my mind caught up. She had my mother's mouth, not the lipstick or the teeth, the shape of it. That soft bow in the top lip, that slight downturn at the corners as if smiling had always cost more than it gave back. "I'm sorry to just show up," she said. Her voice shook once, then steadied. "My name is Mara Bell." I kept one hand on the door because women living alone learn that before they learn anything else. "Can I help you?" She looked past me into the apartment, at the half-unpacked boxes by the wall, the blanket I still hadn't folded on the couch, the mug with cold coffee in it. Then she looked right back at me and said the kind of sentence that splits your life into before and after. "I think your mother is my mother too." For a second, I honestly thought I'd misheard her. I laughed once, short and ugly. "No. I know how this sounds." "No, you don't." I tightened my grip on the door. My mother is 64 years old, lives outside Macon, Georgia, hates flying, arranges flowers for funerals, and has exactly one child. Mara swallowed. That's what she thinks too. Then she reached into her purse very slowly, like she was approaching a frightened animal, and handed me a photograph sealed in a plastic sleeve. It was old, faded at the edges. A hospital room. One narrow bed, one metal crib, one teenage girl sitting up in a wrinkled gown, staring at the camera like she already knew nobody was coming to save her. The girl was my mother, younger than I had ever imagined her, barefaced, hair in 2 loose braids, eyes swollen from crying, and in her arms was a baby wrapped in a yellow blanket. I don't remember inviting Mara in. I only remember the sound of my own pulse in my ears, and the smell of rain steaming off her coat as she sat at my kitchen table and folded her hands together. "My adoptive mother died in March," she said. "Breast cancer. The week before she passed, she gave me a cedar box she'd kept in the back of her closet my whole life. She told me not to open it until after the funeral. I sat across from her, still in scrubs, feeling like I was listening through glass. In the box," she said, "there was that picture, a hospital bracelet with the last name Carver on it, and a note in my mother's handwriting. Carver, my mother's maiden name." A cold feeling moved slowly down my spine. Mara took out a folded sheet of paper, worn from being opened too many times. She wrote that they got me through a private church adoption in 1978. She said the girl who gave birth to me was named Ruth Carver, 17 years old, from a town outside Macon. My mouth went dry. There are lots of Ruth Carvers. She also wrote that Ruth had a little crescent-shaped scar above her right eyebrow. I touched my own brow before I could stop myself. I had the same scar. Mom had gotten it falling off a bike when she was 11. I knew that because she used to point at it whenever I cried over little cuts and say, "You'll live." Mara's eyes softened when she saw my face. "I'm not here for money. I'm not here to ruin anything. She looked down at her hands. My whole life I felt like somebody had taken a page out of the middle of my story. I wanted to know if the missing part was real. I should tell you this about me. I spend my nights in delivery rooms bringing babies into the world, but I had not spoken to my own mother in almost 4 months. We weren't estranged in the dramatic way people imagine. There had been no screaming match, no slammed doors, just a long history of conversations that left me feeling smaller than when they started. My husband, Ethan, had moved out 2 months earlier after our second failed IVF cycle. Neither of us used the word divorce, but it sat between us in every silence. He said grief had turned me into a locked room. I told him he only loved me when I was easy. The truth was uglier. I had become so used to carrying pain quietly that I no longer knew how to do anything else. And now a stranger was sitting in my kitchen with my mother's face, asking me to believe the family I came from had a whole secret daughter tucked behind it. "I need to call her," I said. Mara nodded. "I thought you might," my mother answered on the 4th ring. "Claire?" I hadn't called in weeks. She sounded cautious, not warm. That was our version of tenderness. "There's a woman here," I said. "Her name is Mara Bell." Silence. Not confusion. Not laughter. Silence so complete I pulled the phone away to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Then my mother said, in a voice I had never heard from her before, "You tell that woman to leave your house." I looked at Mara. She sat very still. Mom, do not bring her here. Her breath hitched, sharp. Do not come down here with that woman. Do you hear me? My heart started pounding. Who is she? More silence. Then very quietly, I need you to come home. That was the beginning. Not the truth. Truth came later and uglier. But that was the beginning of the end of the lie. I flew to Georgia 2 days later. Mara didn't ask to come with me. She only gave me her number written on the back of a grocery receipt and said, "Whatever she tells you, if you want to hear my side after, call me." Home looked exactly the same, which felt like an insult. The same white clapboard house with the green shutters. The same pecan tree in the front yard. The same porch swing my father had built before he died 6 years ago. Even the air felt the same. Heavy, sweet, carrying the smell of wet dirt and cut grass and some neighbor frying bacon 3 houses away. My mother was waiting on the porch when the rental car pulled in. She had on a blue cardigan despite the heat and both hands clasped together so tightly the knuckles looked polished. I got out, and for one strange second we just stared at each other. She looked older than she had at Christmas. Smaller. Her silver hair was pinned back carelessly, and there were deep shadows under her eyes like she hadn't slept at all. "Come inside," she said. No hug. Of course no hug. The house still held all the sounds of my childhood. The grandfather clock in the hallway, the soft rattle of the AC vent in the dining room, the floorboard outside the kitchen that always squeaked no matter how many times Dad tried to fix it. My Aunt Beverly was at the table already, thin and tight-faced, with a sweating glass of sweet tea in front of her. The sight of her made my stomach drop. Aunt Bev never showed up unless there was trouble or food, and she hadn't brought a casserole. "Why is Aunt Bev here?" I asked. "Because this concerns the family," she said. That was the first moment I knew the story was going to be worse than I'd imagined. I sat down. Nobody offered me anything to drink. My mother remained standing by the sink, staring at the window over my shoulder. "When I was 17, she said, I got pregnant." Aunt Bev closed her eyes. I waited for shock, but what I felt first was something stranger. Recognition. Like some locked drawer in my mind had slid open, and all the odd little pieces of my childhood were suddenly glowing at once. The way nobody ever talked about my mother's senior year. The one missing yearbook photo. The way Grandma Evelyn used to say, some mistakes change the course of a woman's life, and everybody went quiet after. "Who was the father?" I asked. My mother's jaw worked once. "A boy named Daniel Mercer. Not my father. My father had been Thomas Maddox, kind-eyed, broad-shouldered, patient enough to teach me to drive without raising his voice once. He married my mother years later, when I was 5, the only father I ever knew. Did he know? He knew I was pregnant. He did not know what happened after. Aunt Bev finally spoke. "Ruth, no." My mother turned toward us. Her face had gone pale and hard. "I've buried this long enough. Buried." There it was, that word. Heavy as wet soil. My mother sat down across from me, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear in her stronger than pride. "My mother sent me away to a home in Savannah run by a church ministry for girls in trouble," she said. That's what she called it. Girls in trouble, like we were weather. I didn't say anything. She told everyone I was staying with cousins because of my nerves. I had the baby in August. Her eyes flicked up to mine. "A girl." My throat tightened. "I named her Emily," she whispered. I only got to hold her for a few minutes. Aunt Bev's glass clinked against the table. She had started to cry. My mother went on like she couldn't stop now that the door was open. The doctor came in with my mother and a woman from the church. They told me the baby had trouble breathing. They said she didn't make it through the night. Everything in me went still. "What?" I said. My mother's mouth trembled. They told me she died. I looked from her to Aunt Bev. "And did she?" Neither of them answered. The room seemed to tip sideways. "Aunt Bev," she covered her face with one hand. "We didn't know at first." "At first?" My voice cracked hard on the word. My mother turned to her sister, stunned. "What do you mean at first?" Aunt Bev broke then. Not graceful crying. Not movie crying. A lifetime of cowardice breaking in the body all at once. 6 months later, Mama told me the baby had been placed with a couple in Louisiana, she whispered. "She said you were too fragile to survive knowing." She said it was God's mercy. She said if you found out, you'd go after her and ruin your life. The sound my mother made did not sound human. It was the sound of something old and living finally being ripped open. She pushed back from the table so fast her chair scraped the floor. "You knew?" "Ruth, you knew my baby was alive?" Aunt Bev stood too, weeping openly now. "I was 19. Mama swore if I told you, Daddy would have a stroke, the church would cast us out, your whole life would be over." My whole life was over. My mother was screaming by then. I had never heard her scream. My mother didn't scream. She went cold. She cut with quiet. That was her weapon. But not now. She grabbed the counter to steady herself, breathing so hard I thought she might faint. "All these years," she said, looking at her sister with a hatred so old it felt inherited. "All these birthdays, all those nights. I mourned a child they stole from me, and you sat in my kitchen and passed biscuits." I started crying without realizing it. Maybe because she was. Maybe because the room was full of decades nobody had survived. Aunt Bev reached for her, and my mother jerked away so violently she hit the wall. "Don't touch me." "Ruth, I was wrong. You were cruel. I should have done something, said something." But I was standing there with my own life rearranging itself in real time. Mara wasn't my mother's shame. She was my mother's stolen child. My sister. That night I slept in my old bedroom with the ceiling fan clicking overhead and the smell of cedar still faint in the closet. I didn't really sleep. I stared at the dark and listened to the house settle. At 2 a.m, I heard my mother crying through the wall. Not loud. Just enough. The next day, I drove to Aunt Bev's house because grief without facts feels like poison. She opened the door already looking defeated. No makeup, bathrobe still on, 50 years old and suddenly a little girl who had made the wrong choice and kept making it because admitting it would kill her. "I need everything," I said. "Not what you think protects somebody. Everything." She let me in. What she gave me was a cardboard box from the top shelf of her hall closet. Inside were letters, 23 of them. All addressed in the same careful, slanted handwriting. Ruth Carver Maddox. Some from Baton Rouge. Some from Shreveport. One from Houston. Spanning almost 20 years, my hands shook so badly I nearly dropped them. "She found your mother before," Aunt Bev said. "At least tried to." The first letter came when Mara was 26. She'd gotten enough information from the agency to start looking. Mama was dead by then, but Aunt Bev swallowed hard. I told myself Ruth had suffered enough. I told myself reopening it would destroy her. "So you hid them?" "Yes." I laughed then because when something is monstrous enough, laughter is the only sound left before you fall apart. "These are her daughter's letters." "I know." "No, I don't think you do." I took the box and left before I said something I could never take back. My mother was in the greenhouse behind the flower shop when I returned. She was sitting on an overturned bucket among trays of hydrangeas, hands hanging empty between her knees. I had spent my whole childhood believing she was made of stone. But grief, I learned, doesn't harden people. It calcifies around whatever they never got to say. I held out the box. "What is that?" Proof that she tried to come back. She looked up, really looked. Then she opened the top letter. I watched her face as she read. "Dear Ms. Maddox, my name is Mara Bell. I don't know if you are the Ruth Carver listed on the adoption file, but if you are, I want you to know I am not angry." My mother pressed her hand over her mouth. The second letter was gentler. The third angrier. The fifth included a photograph of a little girl missing 2 front teeth. The ninth said, "I had a daughter today. Holding her made me think of you." By the 10th letter, my mother was shaking so hard the paper crackled in her hands. "She had a daughter," she whispered. "Yes." My mother looked up at me, and suddenly I was 10 years old again with the flu, waking to find her cool hand on my forehead in the dark. I was 16, heartbroken over a boy, and her leaving hot tea outside my door without knocking. I was 29 after my miscarriage, hearing her say on the phone, in that stiff, uncomfortable voice she used for love, "Some losses don't leave clean." All my life I had mistaken her distance for indifference. Maybe some of it had been, we are all guilty of the injuries we pass on, but some of it had been terror. She had once loved a daughter and lost her to a lie so complete it remade her bones. "Why didn't you ever tell me about the baby?" I asked softly. She stared at the letters. Because if I said her name out loud, it made her dead again. Then her face folded and she said the truest thing I had ever heard from her. And because I was afraid if I loved you too loudly, something would take you too. I sat beside her on the concrete floor of the greenhouse and cried with my mother for the first time in my life. No fixing, no wisdom, just 2 women with ruined timing and the same mouth trying to breathe inside the truth. That evening I called Mara. She answered on the second ring like she'd been waiting with the phone in her hand. "Hi," I said, and my voice broke. There was a pause. Then, very gently, "Hi, Claire." "She didn't give you away," I said. "They told her you died." Mara didn't speak for several seconds. When she finally did, I heard her inhale sharply, like she'd been punched. "Oh," she whispered. I told her everything I knew. The home in Savannah. The lies. The letters Aunt Bev hid. By the end, both of us were crying, and neither of us was pretending not to. "Does she want to talk to me?" Mara asked. I looked through the greenhouse glass. My mother sat on the bench outside, holding one of Mara's old photographs in both hands like something breakable and holy. Yes, I said. But she's scared. Mara gave a sad little laugh. Me too. They met 3 days later in my mother's living room. I stayed in the kitchen at first because some moments are too private, even when they belong to your family. I could hear only pieces, a door opening, a breath caught too hard. Then my mother saying, "Emily," and Mara, my sister, answering through tears. "I've been Mara so long, I don't know who that is anymore." After a while, I heard chairs move, then the low murmur of women stitching years together by hand. When I finally stepped in, they were sitting across from each other on the sofa, both crying, both smiling in this stunned, painful way people do when joy arrives wearing grief's clothes. My mother reached for my hand and pulled me down beside her. "This is my daughter Mara," she said. Then she turned to Mara, and with a softness I had begged from her my whole life, added, "And this is your sister Claire." Mara looked at me then, really looked, and started laughing through her tears. "You do have her eyebrows." "Lucky me," I said, and somehow that broke the tension enough that we all laughed, not because anything was fixed. Because it wasn't, and still there we were. Aunt Bev did not come by for weeks. When she finally did, my mother made her stand on the porch and apologize where the whole world could hear. It wasn't dramatic revenge. There was no slammed gate, no disowning speech, just truth spoken plain. "You do not get to carry this secret from me anymore," my mother said. "If you want to be in my life, you will tell it straight." Aunt Bev nodded, crying again. Whether forgiveness came after that is a separate story. Forgiveness is not a door. It's a hallway, and some days you sit down in it. Before I flew back to Denver, Mara and I drove out to the cemetery where my grandparents were buried. There was no grave for the baby my mother had been told she lost. Just my grandmother's polished stone and the hot hush of late afternoon. My mother stood between us, shoulders squared against the wind. "I spent 46 years talking to a dead child," she said. "I think I'd like to stop now." Then she took the wilted artificial flowers off her mother's grave and laid them face down in the grass. It was the smallest gesture in the world. It felt like thunder. Back in Denver, I called Ethan for the first time in weeks and told him the truth about where I'd been. All of it. The sister, the stolen history. The reason I had spent so much of our marriage afraid of losing things before they were even mine. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Claire, I can't promise I know how to help, but I can come sit on the floor with you while you figure it out." For once, I didn't say I was fine. That was months ago. Now Mara calls me every Sunday. My mother sometimes joins from the flower shop, usually to correct one of us or complain about peonies, which is as close to tenderness as Southern women of her generation often get. Mara's daughter, Lucy, is due in August with a baby girl. My mother is already sewing blankets she pretends are just something to do with my hands. Last week, Mara mailed me a copy of that hospital photograph. On the back, in her neat handwriting, she wrote, "For the sister I didn't get to grow up with. We still have time. I keep it on my nightstand now. Some nights I wake up and look at it just to remind myself that families are not always broken by one terrible thing. Sometimes they're broken by silence, by cowardice, by the lies people call mercy when they are too weak to name them honestly. And sometimes they begin again with a knock at the door on a rainy afternoon, when a woman with your mother's mouth asks for a minute and hands you back the missing page. I used to think healing would feel clean. It doesn't. It feels like opening letters too late. It feels like rage in a greenhouse. It feels like hearing your mother say a buried name out loud and watching the dead move aside for the living. It feels like making room. And if you want the truth, the whole truth, the part that still catches in my throat, I don't think this story is over. Because in August, I'm flying back to Georgia. Mara will be there. My mother will be there. And somewhere in that room, a new baby girl will open her eyes into a family that finally knows what silence can cost. This time, nobody is going to let a daughter disappear.